Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint, and today we're going to be taking a look at Phil Kayser's comments on immigration. And he begins, my exposure to his comments has started with his criticism of the debate that Alan Miracle and I did at the 2024 Future of Christendom conference. And you can find that on YouTube under Future of Christendom. And I guess some people had been sending him some questions, and he decided to do, I guess, a mass email, or he had a small, very small position paper on immigration by Phil Kayser. And we're going to take a look at that, a few comments from that. But first, we're going to look into his interview that he did just a few days ago with Kevin Swanson on January 6th, the Generations Radio podcast with Kevin Swanson about, and it's called What the Bible Says About Immigration and Multiculturalism. So we're going to listen to a few clips from that, and we're going to take a look at what Phil Kayser has to say about immigration, what the Bible has to say about it, then we'll examine those comments. And I mean, just from what I've been hearing Phil Kayser say, I'm very confused from some of the things he says, and I'll show you why. We'll begin with the podcast, so let's get right into it. Here's Phil Kayser on Kevin Swanson's podcast, Generations. So Kevin Swanson starts it off. Here we go.
Out this year on biblical blueprints for government, but let's talk about immigration. The Bible is not 100% anti-immigration or anti-stranger. In fact, we're called to love the stranger in the land. That's pretty big for Old Testament biblical law. But how does that reflect? What do we do? I know you talk about 4 types of strangers or foreigners in the land. How does the Bible break this down?
Yeah, there is the czar, a stranger who's really outside of the covenant. He's unknown. You don't know whether he's good or bad. There's the ger, who actually is integrated into society, is protected. There's the toshav, stranger, who's a temporary sojourner. He too is protected by the law of God. In fact, charity was supposed to be given to both. And then there's the nekar. These are all Hebrew words, but the nekar, foreigner, was treated more like an enemy. Mm-hmm. Those are the types that were explicitly said to be banished from the land if a nekar came up from within the land, or were to be kept out of the land. And a lot of people say, no, we're supposed to bring all foreigners, but we need to realize there's 4 different kinds of foreigners that the Scripture describes.
Yeah. Now, I've always taken the position, Phil, that a terrorist who comes in with the Quran in one hand and kill the infidel tattooed on his other arm should be prevented from coming into the country. And that, of course, would include those marked out as members of the Tren de Aragua gang and the Barrio Azteca gang, et cetera, et cetera. And you take that position as well. These should not be allowed into the country.
That's correct. In fact, one of those gangs has as their motto, mata, roba, viola, controla, which means kill, steal, rape, and control. And their initiation into the gang, a lot of these gangs required a murder and other criminal activities. And so I would say those, by definition, should be excluded. Some people think you wait till they commit the crime in the country, but the very fact that they're a part of the gang, I think, defines them as a nekar, kind of a foreigner that should be kept out.
So what have we done wrongly?
I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here to some more comments he makes regarding these categories here.
In fact, he set up the law of God itself allowed for watchtowers, fortresses, and God approved of David and Solomon and other kings that very explicitly approved of these watchtowers and borders to monitor who's coming in, who's going out. And so there could be interviews of people to see, is this a legitimate immigrant? Yep, let's let them in. The law commanded people to be kind to and to be welcoming to the Ger and to the Toshav foreigners.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
Okay, so he's making a case here, and this, I mean, I don't know about you, but I always get a little nervous when people start bringing up the Hebrew. When we're talking about matters of justice, are we really saying that until we know Hebrew, we cannot establish justice? The only way for us to establish justice in the land is, because if it's this important, these categories, so we need to know the 4 categories, right? We need the 4 categories of immigrant. And if this issue is so important, right? This is such an important issue, and even Kevin Swanson says on the podcast, he thinks this is the most important issue facing our country today. If I'm quoting him correctly, he talks about abortion, but I think the phraseology he uses is the most important issue we're facing today. Are we really saying that until we learn Hebrew and know the Hebrew, that we cannot establish justice in the land? Is that what we're saying? Because what I believe is that anybody can establish justice with using the Bible in their own tongue. If it's translated from the Hebrew and the Greek and the Aramaic to that language, you have enough there to establish justice. And I get a little nervous when people are like, well, we need to check the Hebrew. And, oh, look, there's 4 different types of categories. And we haven't established justice up until this point because we never knew about these categories. Is that what we're saying? Are we making that argument here? I don't think anybody is, but I think there's a strong implication that we can't establish justice in the land until we correctly identify the 4 different categories, just the way the Hebrews did. Now, there's a lot of ink spilled on the, it's not just Dr. Kayser, but it's other writers too, about the 4 categories of immigrants. What's really weird is that it is a very bad biblical argument, and I'll show you why. I'm going to go to Phil Kayser's paper right here. In his paper of his criticism of my debate with Alan, he says, one critical point, this is Phil Kayser talking here in his paper, one critical point in this discussion is to realize that foreigners or aliens is not one category in Scripture with one set of laws regulating it. The Bible clearly distinguishes between 4 different kinds of aliens. See, we got to get into the Hebrew, right? And until we get into the Hebrew, we can't establish justice. I'm a little worried that's what's being said here. See the chart below. To confuse those 4 types would bring some scriptures into contradiction with each other. For instance, the alien who is, quote, within your gates, Deuteronomy 14:21, was a ger, an integrated, protected, permanent resident, not a nakar, enemy foreigner who embraced a false religion. Okay, we'll read that for you again. Nakar, enemy foreigner who embraced a false religion. Okay, I'm just going to swing right over here to Blue Letter Bible. This is Solomon's dedication of the temple. Okay, now let me just preface this by saying, okay, Phil Kayser's argument for Ruth is that Ruth calls herself a nakar, saying, you know, why are you showing mercy to me? I'm a nakar and all that kind of stuff. I think she says to I think it's Boaz, or is it Naomi? I forget which one. But she calls herself a nakar, and then in Phil Kayser's paper, he says, well, she was just being humble. Let me just read it for you here. Ruth was truly a ger, not a nakar, though in her humility she called herself a nakar. Both Zarim and Nakrim were strangers, but the Nakar stranger was more distant and more distrusted. Israelites were allowed to charge interest to the Nakrim strangers, but were not allowed to charge interest to the other 3 categories. Okay. So he's calling Ruth a ger because a ger is somebody who believes in God, basically trusts in God, and who's willing to live in Israel under God's law. But Nakar is not. Okay, I don't think it's a faithful biblical argument to disagree with Ruth and say, "Oh no, you're just being humble, Ruth. You really don't know what you're talking about. You're just being humble." I don't think it's biblical at all. So when we're trying to figure out the categories here and what they mean, here's Ruth, who would definitely know the categories, and she calls herself a nakar. And if she calls herself a nakar, then I think we should call her a nakar. All right, I don't think we would come in there and say, well, no. I don't think that's a faithful exegesis of the text. But let me just go down here to his categories here. Nakar, a foreigner who is generally recognized as coming from a hostile region or religion, excluded from covenant life, excluded from living in Israel. Israel was at war with any Nakar who were living within the borders, that is the Canaanites. Negative with respect to immigration, neutral to respect with respect to foreign trade. Though Israelites could purchase and sell things to the Nakar and other countries, they were to remain completely separate from them. Someone with allegiance to a hostile country. So the modern equivalent in his mind is someone with an allegiance to a hostile country, China, Iran. We can trade with them, but should exercise care in allowing them into the country. Now, this is Phil Kayser's understanding of these categories. I'm going to just swing right over here to 1 Kings. Here's Solomon's dedication to the temple. Okay. I'm going to start 1 Kings 8:39. Then hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive, and do, and give to every man according to his ways, whose heart thou knowest. For thou, even thou only, knowest the hearts of all the children of men. That they may fear thee all the days that they live in the land which thou gavest unto our fathers. Okay? Now this is where it gets interesting. Moreover, 1 Kings 8:41, moreover concerning a stranger that is not of thy people Israel, but cometh out of a far country for thy name's sake. For they shall hear of thy great name, and of thy strong hand, and of thy outstretched arm, when he shall come and pray towards this house. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the stranger calleth to thee for, that all people on the earth may know thy name, to fear thee, as do thy people Israel, and that they may know that this house which I have builded is called by thy name. I'm going to say this again. 1 Kings 8:43. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the Nakar calleth to thee for. It's not the Ger, it's the Nakar. This person that we're not allowed to be in the country. You're Nakar, not allowed in here. What is he doing at the temple? What is he doing at the temple? The most sacred place in all of Israel? We're going to let this guy come in here? This Nakar, who's obviously of a hostile religion? That's the word he's using. This is Solomon praying the dedication of the temple. And he identifies the Nakar coming from a faraway place to call upon God in the temple. And now someone might say, well, he's just praying right from a faraway place. No. 8:41, moreover concerning a Nakar that is not of thy people Israel, but cometh out of a far country for thy name's sake. Cometh where? We're dedicating the temple here. And this is just a brief word search on Blue Letter Bible. And we get Nakars coming into the temple. After all this category and all these, like we're lining them up here, understanding the categories, and a brief word search yields that the Nakar is walking right into the temple. How does that make sense? To me, the whole categorical distinction is completely gone now. Completely gone. I believe there's some sort of argument for charging interest. But as far as keeping people out of the land, because Phil Kayser's argument was, okay, she's not in a car, right? Ruth is not in a car because anyone who believes in God, it automatically becomes a ger. But here's Solomon saying the Nakar comes here, calls on thy name, do all according to that he asks of thee. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the Nakar calleth to thee for, that all the people of the earth may know thy name, to fear thee, and do thy people Israel, as do thy people Israel, and that they may know that this house which I builded is called by thy name. What is a Nakar doing strolling right into the temple? I thought it was be the ger. No, it's not the ger. It's the Nakar. This person that we're supposed to keep out. He's strolling right into the temple. To me, that the whole argument for categorical distinctions about immigrants and all that kind of stuff is gone. if we're supposed to keep these people out and identify them as Nakar, and if he says, well, no, I know I might be Nakar, but I really believe in God, we're going to be like, oh, yeah, sure, right. Nice try. You're not coming in here. Then why even ask them questions? Why interview them if Israel was already letting them have access to the temple? Why are we interviewing these people? What sense does that make? What could they possibly say or do for us to say, no, you can't come in here? If Solomon is asking the Lord to allow the Nakar to come to the temple to ask for God's blessing, then why in the world are we interviewing people? This is not the ger. This is not somebody who said, okay, I promise to be a good boy and follow all the rules. This is the Nakar, the person we're supposed to keep out. You know, the tattooed drug dealer from whatever MS-13 down in Mexico. Or somebody who has an allegiance to a hostile territory, a hostile country, they were allowing into the land. Here it is. I'm going to read it again. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the Nakar calleth to thee for, that all people of the earth may know thy name. Moreover, concerning a Nakar that is not of thy people Israel, but cometh out of a far country for thy name's sake. What are we doing here with this categorical distinction? If the kings, if in the book of Kings we see that Solomon was asking the Lord to give ear to the worst of all strangers, the one we're supposed to keep out, and that he was walking to the temple and he was having access to the temple, then why in the world are we keeping these people out? This makes no sense to me. Again, excluded from covenant life is Phil Kayser's category here. Legal/religious status, excluded from covenant life, excluded from living in Israel, but he's walking in to the temple. This Nakar. And his example is Exodus 23:33. Exodus 23:33 says, they shall not dwell in thy land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if thou serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to thee. You know, you often wonder why God keeps listing the people that the Israelites were supposed to, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, all these ites. That's who they're supposed to be driving out, not just the Nakar. This general sense of anyone who identifies as a Nakar. Specific tribes of people is who they were supposed to be eliminating from the land. Obviously, Ruth, if she identifies herself as a Nakar, a Moabitess, they're not supposed to be out there eliminating the Moabites. They're not. They're often at war with the Moabites, but I believe it says, you shall not hate a Moabite. No, sorry, that's Edomite. I'm getting it's Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. Sorry, you should not hate an Edomite. No, so I got that confused. But the Moabites, they weren't allowed into the assembly up to the 10th generation, or was it the 10th generation? Yes. They were not allowed into the assembly of the Lord, which people often take for like a 1-to-1 ratio of citizenship, which I don't think is a good argument at all, because now we can't give citizenship to people with crushed testicles, because anyone with crushed testicles was not allowed in the assembly of the Lord. Right, and then you might say, well, that's a ceremonial thing. That's a ceremonial aspect. Okay, then the whole thing's ceremonial. Okay, which I do believe it is. I believe it's a ceremonial aspect. The assembly of the Lord. That distinction has been fulfilled. There's no Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. The assembly is made up of everybody now, and is no longer a race distinction or a physical distinction that you can point to in the people. And that's why it crushed testicles are tied to that. But if people want to be like, oh no, it's a 1-to-1 ratio of citizenship into the land, then we got to keep out people with crushed testicles. I'm sorry. And let me just ask this question. All right, it's a weird question to ask, but I feel like my hand is kind of being forced here. You know, we're not allowed to let certain people. The Israelites are not allowed to allow certain peoples of certain backgrounds, right? And so therefore they had to vet them, right? That's the argument. Everyone had to be vetted, right? Had to be vetted at the border. That's where they're going with this. At the border, we needed patrols, we needed checkpoints, we needed papers, please. Who are you? Justify yourself. Don't lie to me. And we need you to tell your full story background before we can let you in. And then our state-approved interviewer will say yay or nay, and you will be allowed or disallowed into the land. And so that's the argument, right? Because we had the assembly, and we need to interview these people, right? Because they might fit a category that's not allowed into the assembly. And let me ask you this question: who was going around to check crushed testicles before they assembled? Surely they must have had somebody. That was his job, right? Because we got to vet everybody, right? Right? Just like the Moabites, we cannot allow in the assembly. We need somebody going around looking for Moabites, and we need people at the border checking Moabites and Moabite statuses, because this whole assembly thing means we're allowed to vet people. Who was vetting the people who had crushed testicles? How in the world did they find that out? Do you have someone before we assemble? Okay, line up. Time to lift up your skirts, lads. You might have got your testicles crushed this morning. We can't keep you out. I mean, we can't let you in, right? We got to vet everybody, right? It's a silly question, but this idea that we need to be vetting everybody all the time because Israel did it allegedly. Do you really think that they were going around checking everyone for crushed testicles? That there was like this whole network of people? Because again, this is something that's so important. That we see that if somebody sinned in this regard, it could send the whole assembly into judgment. That's a very important and serious thing. If you allow somebody with crushed testicles into your assembly, was there someone going around and checking everybody before they assembled for crushed testicles? Yes or no? If there wasn't, then why not? We got to vet everybody, right? It's all about the assembly. The whole argument doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense from a biblical perspective. How in the world are these Nakri walking into the temple to ask God for things? How is that happening? I thought we're supposed to keep these people out. But here he is, just waltzing right in. And Solomon's asking God to hear him and give to this person who's allegedly from Phil Kayser's categories, and not just his categories, other people's categories I've read as well. This person that we're supposed to keep out, we're supposed to be at war with, we're supposed to be eliminating this person, right? The Canaanites was basically the only crime of status that the Bible ever recognized. If you are a Canaanite, you must be killed, regardless of what you think or you have or have not done. The part of your ontological status is that you must be eliminated from the land by the Israelites, right? Because that's what we just said here. The passage in Exodus 23 is talking about eliminating the Canaanites, and that's what we're supposed to be doing with the Nekar. If we're going to compare them to the Canaanites, we got to be eliminating them. Not only that, thank you, Bill Fortenberry, for this. He pointed out in a paper that he did. That Ittai the Gittite was a Nekar. 2 Samuel 15, 19 to 22. So here it is. 2 Samuel 15, 19 to 22. The king said to Ittai, this is as David's leaving Jerusalem because of Absalom's coup. And then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why do you go also with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a Nekar and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go know not where? Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you." He's a Nekar. What is he doing in the land, especially being friends with the king? But Ittai answered the king, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be." And David said to Ittai, "Go then, pass on." So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all of his men and all the little ones who were with him. What is this Nekar who we're supposed to be keeping out of the land? Can't be trusted. What is he doing with the king as a trusted servant? People don't believe me. 2 Samuel 15. 19. 2 Samuel 15:19. And the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, for thou art a stranger and also an exile." So let's look up the Blue Letter Bible. What type of stranger are we talking about here? Is this a ger? I mean, which one are we talking about here? A zar, a ger, a toshav, or a nekar? The nekar, a foreigner who is generally recognized as coming from a hostile region or religion. Though Israelites could purchase and sell things to the nekar, in other countries they were to remain completely separate from them. Completely separate from them. Okay? King said, "Wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, for thou art a nakri, thou art a nakar." Are we going to make the argument here? That David was being unfaithful? That he should have not even talked to this guy? Turned heel and walked away like Christ did to the Canaanite woman? Is that what he should have done? Yet this guy seems like a pretty decent guy. What is he doing here? This whole argument for the distinction, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if these Nekar are hanging around the palace and the temple. What is going on? Especially friends with the king. The whole argument for the distinctions of the immigrants, and we need to properly categorize them, I think it doesn't make sense biblically. It just doesn't. Clearly, these people were walking all over Israel. If they're getting access to the king and access to the temple, they were all over the place. I want to skip ahead a little bit here and talk about something that Phil Kayser also brings up, which to me, I think is not a faithful, and I say this very carefully because Phil Kayser always has a reason. He always has a reason. I'm just saying from my perspective, this doesn't make sense, what's about to happen. And I'll let you decide for yourself. But this doesn't make sense what he's about to say here. I'm going to bring this up to you here.
Economics automatically corrects itself. And I like what Elon Musk and
Are taking advantage of welfare onto.
Yes, and there are people who I think overreact and they want to kick out all, and they say they're taking away our jobs. The Bible has a balance between economy booms. There's going to be more work.
Denominator is the law of our God, the law of God.
And I think the God, one nation under God is to America's culture. We're no longer
Fails, where the salad bowl turns into
Sorry, let me. I'm looking for the spot. I kind of
A
lost
time
it.
bomb.
I didn't
Does that make
timestamp it
sense?
correctly.
Yes, I will, and a return to the biblical context.
They were not born in the States. So 70 to
Right.
73%. I have a couple different. 18. The research paper reports again 63% of non-citizen households access welfare programs. And that's a concern for me. I mean, one of the most significant concerns for me is if somebody breaks into a crack house, it's not so much the people breaking into the crack house as what's going on in the crack house that bothers me. So, I'm concerned for the fact that this nation is somewhat of a crack house. And we're offering crack by welfare, or we're offering just about anything by welfare, even for these non-citizens that enter the country. And that to me is probably the most significant problem that faces the nation today.
Okay, so there it is from Kevin Swanson. The most significant problem that faces the nations today, that we're giving free. I mean, we're offering these stupid welfare programs to people from outside this country to immigrants in hopes that since the Democratic overlords gave them this free stuff, they would turn around and become Democratic voters. And this is the most significant issue to Kevin Swanson today. If he phrased that correctly, if I'm understanding him correctly, I disagree with that. I'm not going to really nickel and dime him. Obviously, it's a huge problem. But I mean, I just think, like, if you compare that to a faithless and godless whore church and the fact that we kill our own babies, I think that's a distant third. I really do, in my opinion. I mean, a faithless and godless church and the fact that we kill our own babies, that it's oftentimes the church killing their own babies, is the problem of immigration is a distant third. And just that this is my own personal opinion.
Yes.
Or
yes.
one of them.
And
Okay, so he corrects himself, or one of the biggest problems. See, because he said earlier in the podcast, I really think abortion's probably like one of, if not the biggest one of the biggest ones. So he corrected himself there.
I agree, and some of these people should be prosecuted if they're within the land or if they cross the border illegally. But God allowed the concept of banishment, Hebrew word nadach.
Okay, I want you to listen to that. Okay, God allowed the concept of banishment, Hebrew word nadach. Okay.
And that word occurs over and over again, where it says, that they shall not dwell in the land. They were supposed to be banished from the land. And so God praises kings who, like, for example, let me see here, 1 Kings 22:46 and 1 Kings 15:11. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did his father, in that he banished the perverted persons from the land and removed all the idols that his father had made. So he's praised for banishing people. So if a person is banished, he's not allowed in the border, that's border control, is it not? He's not supposed to be allowed back in. And so anyway, if you look up all of the occurrences of that word nadach.
Yeah, and so this is the weird thing that I just doesn't make sense to me no matter which way I put it, trying to give Dr. Phil a benefit of a doubt here. But I was led astray listening to that, okay? Maybe you weren't. Maybe you can understand what he's saying better, but I just want to point this out, that when we go to 1 Kings 15, and Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father did, and he took away the Sodomites out of the land and removed all the idols that his father had made. Just looking this up here. And he took away the Sodomites. The word is not nadach. It's abar. To pass over, or to looking up the definition here. To pass over or by or through, alienate, bring, carry, do away, take away, transgress. To pass beyond, to pass through, traverse, to pass along, pass on, pass away, to emigrate, leave, vanish, perish, cease to exist, to become invalid, become obsolete, to be alienated. That's what the abar means. But the word nadach is not in here. He did not banish the Sodomites. I mean, from my brief research and understanding, and I'm sure Phil Kayser would probably correct me on this, but it seems to me from what's happening here in the Hebrew, it's kind of like the way that we say, yeah, we got rid of them. I didn't tell you how we got rid of them. We just know that they're gone, right? He got rid of the Sodomites. It doesn't say how, because we know that the biblical punishment for sodomy is not banishment, okay? When you find someone committing sodomy, you don't banish them, okay? That's a capital offense. So if the Bible is praising him for treating sodomites the way that sodomites deserve to be treated under biblical law, then we know he's not banishing them because it never calls for their banishment. So it can't be banishment. I think what happened was that the king started getting rid of them, started a campaign against them, and was giving them the biblical punishment, and that the rest of them saw what was happening and they got out of Dodge. And that way he got rid of them. But it doesn't say that he banished them. That's the first one. The second one he gives here is 1 Kings 22. First Kings 22. I forget let me just go back here.
So if a person is banished, he's not allowed in the border. That's border control, is it not? He's not supposed to be allowed back in. And so anyway, if you look up all made, so let me see here, 1 Kings 22:46.
46, okay. 1 Kings 22:46. And the remnant of the Sodomites which remained in the days of his father, he took out of the land. Okay, so looking this one up too. And the remnant of the Sodomites which remained in the days of his father Asa, he took. Ba'ar, again, not Nadach. Ba'ar, which means to begin to burn, consume, kindle, be kindled. Now, it's really weird in the translation here, Strong's, this word, abar, like he took from the land. It's translated burn 41 times, away 21 times, kindle 13 times, brutish 7 times, eaten twice. And there's a couple other various ones here. And took just once. And it's in this passage. They translated it took. It's the only place in the Bible they translated this word took. So again, this is not a good, solid case for banishment, because we don't know exactly what happened. The Hebrew word, nadach, is in neither of these passages. I'm going to play this clip for you again, because it's really weird. I was led astray.
And where it says, that they shall not dwell in the land. They were supposed to be banished from the land. And so God praises kings who, like, for example, let me see here, 1 Kings 22:46 and 1 Kings 15:11. Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did his father, in that he banished the perverted persons from the land and removed all the idols that his father had.
Only a few translations put it banished. Some say took, some say removed, but not all of them say banished.
Made. So he's praised for banishing people. So if a person is banished, he's not allowed in the border. That's border control, is it not? He's not supposed to be allowed back in. And so anyway, if you look up all of the occurrences of that word nadach.
But nadach is in neither of those passages. It's in neither of those passages. What are we left to believe about this? I was led astray. I'm this close to sending an email to Kevin Swanson, be like, hey, Kevin, just want to let you know, that word is not in either of those passages. And maybe you can make the argument Phil Kayser's not saying that it is, but I was led to believe that it was. That's why I looked it up. I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Being involved in this argument, I was very interested to know that God is praising kings for banishing certain peoples. But once I look it up, maybe the kings are banishing in them, and maybe they're not. The word banished is not used the way that he said it's being used. And the word that he's saying is in there, it's not even in there. I don't know what to make of that. It's really weird, because usually Phil Kayser's like solid biblical case, but this is, I think, you could drive a Mack truck through these arguments. And if Phil Kayser can't make a solid, pro immigration policy case, I don't think anyone can, honestly. So going back to his paper here, I just want to bring up one more thing. Okay, so in the paper here, Phil Kayser says, Luke made an error when he said that prior to 1882, the United States immigration policies were similar to his. I don't think I said similar to mine. I don't use that phraseology. Maybe I did, but I'm usually my phraseology is they didn't have an immigration policy, had no immigration policy. I'm not saying it's similar to mine. And then he continues, that is actually not true. While the immigration policies were much more generous, there were some ungodly ones. For example, the Naturalization Act of 1790 only allowed free white persons of good character to become citizens after 2 years of residency. Now, it's strange to me that this paper begins off with, we need to get our categories correct here. There's categories and we need to get them correct. And it's strange to me that Phil Kayser takes issue with what I said, we had no immigration policy, and then compares my phrase of we had no immigration policy to, yes, we had a citizenship requirements. Well, that's a complete categorical error. I never said there was no citizenship requirements. Of course, I knew about the citizenship requirements. It's in the Constitution. There's citizenship requirements, but that is not an immigration policy. That's completely different. They weren't kicking people out because they weren't citizens. There was no team of people saying, are you a citizen? Are you a citizen? Okay, time to get kicked out because you're not a citizen. To become a citizen and get certain privileges given to you by the government, yes, that was there. But to come to the United States for the first 100 years, up until 1882, there was no immigration process. You didn't have to fill anything out. You didn't have to answer any questions. There was no one there at the border to interview you. That is by the state. The government was not interviewing people. The government didn't have checkpoints. You could just come in from anywhere. You could buy land and you could live relatively unmolested as long as you were a peaceful person. And that's what a lot of people did. This is not how most of our fathers did. Is not why most of the people walking around America today can find some sort of foreign person who came to this country. He continues, likewise, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 allowed the federal government to deport non-citizens deemed dangerous and made it harder for immigrants to gain citizenship. But this is not what I've said. I never said that immigrants never had to become citizens. I said there was no immigration policy. And it's true, there is no immigration policy until 1882. I stand by that statement. But he says what I said is not true. I'm telling you it is. It's very true. There is no immigration policy until 1882 when they stopped the Chinese women. They stopped the importation of Chinese women. But until then, there was no requirement. There was no checkpoint. There was no passport that you had to show to somebody to say, well, I'm allowed in here because the government said I could be in here. Blah, 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 blah. And he makes a point that I agree with when he says, likewise, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 allowed the federal government to deport non-citizens deemed dangerous and made it harder for immigrants to gain citizenship. But what is dangerous, he says here, and this is his criticism of the government calling people dangerous. And I'm like, welcome to my side, Phil. Welcome to my side. The government is not there to tell us who is allowed in and who is not allowed in, because they don't know how to correctly categorize people. They don't know. And that standard, if you give them that power and authority, that standard is going to change and it will eventually attack the righteous, as it always has. Man-made law always ends up attacking the righteous. Always. Because our nature, we only function the way we're supposed to function under God's law. That's it. And when we introduce man's law, like this whole immigration process and policy and all these weird made-up rules and categories that we have to impose on people, that's not how we're meant to live. That's not how we're supposed to live, because God's law doesn't do that. My dad often brings up the point, we need to pay attention to we need to pay attention to the phrase, so shall you purge the wicked one from your land, or so shall you remove the evil from your land, right? He's like, why don't we pay attention to that? Because that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to keep evil people out. And God says, so shall you purge the evil from the land. Never once is that tied to banishment. That's always tied to God's punishments that he lays out in his law, but it's never tied to banishment. God's law never recommends banishment unless you take the approach of cutoff means banishment, but I don't think it does. But when the Bible uses the phrase, so shall you purge the wicked from among you, I think we need to pay attention to that. Because if we want to get rid of wicked people, maybe we should do it the way God told us to do it, which doesn't involve banishment, which involves the penalties and punishments that he instituted. And I agree with Phil Kayser. What he said, make it deemed dangerous by the government, and then he says, "But what is dangerous?" And I agree. What isn't a car? I don't know. I don't know if this Nakar is walking all the way up to the temple. What is a Nakar? I don't know. Honestly, I think the distinctions are relevant once you see how they're played out in the scriptures. So Phil has a book on civics coming out where he goes further into detail. I think it's going to be a huge book. I think it's going to be a massive book. But he goes further into detail about all of these things. So he'll probably have more scripture to talk about and more instances and things like that. But from what he said so far, I think it was not a good exegetical biblical case. And I can't believe I'm saying that about Phil Kayser. But it's just not a good biblical case. These distinctions, the way that he uses them, obviously Solomon disagrees. And his declaration, or his observation that I was wrong about, the United States not having an immigration policy for the first 100 years. Well, they didn't. They really didn't. No immigration policy. Citizenship and immigration are not the same thing. And his use of the word nadach as far as banishment. And then he lists two passages that do not feature that word. I don't know what's going on. But I just don't think that's a good case for now we need to interview people at the border and disallow some people from going. And once they very foolishly are honest about who they are and what they're there for. The kind of bureaucracy that you need to be able to interview all these people, especially in a nation like America with our borders being massive, the kind of bureaucracy that is needed and government oversight, taxes, money, it's all a waste. God's penalties, God's sanctions, God's punishments, God's law is how we will get rest and peace in this land. Man's law only complicates things and makes things worse. And this idea of we need to be stopping people and interviewing them and making them justify themselves before they come to the country by the state, I think is a completely ridiculous and anti-biblical notion. That's all I have for today, friends. Thanks for listening to the Think and Reform podcast. We'll see you next time. And remember, friends, think and reform.